Let's take 300.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Stuart Shanker, one of my absolute favorite people in the world who personally changed my life, and consequently my children's lives. There's a dog having a drink of water, which is very self-reg in the background here. That's a trigger for some people and not for others. The reason I want to do this interview is, one, self-reg has been critical in helping me through all of this, Stuart, and it helps me in my everyday life. I always compare self-reg to fitness, in that you can know it, but you have to continually practice it for it to work.
Yep.
And you did a video, and you've been doing amazing videos. And if people aren't following, you need to go to selfreg.ca. Everything is there. Their Facebook is Merit Center. It's all the resources you need, online courses, just life-changing stuff. But you did one personal video, and I instantly sent a message and said, can we do an interview? And you shared your own personal connection to self-reg and this pandemic. And what jumped out at me, because it's hard for me to talk without giving too much information, not enough information, all of these things. What jumped out is you recognizing that your calm is not someone else's calm. Your stress is not someone else's stress. And so when we're confined and self-isolated with people, recognizing that is a game changer.
That's awesome.
And so I was like, because you were like, you said, I need to be moving and focusing and creating. And I'm in the background like, yeah, that's me. So I connect with that.
That's great.
It still doesn't calm me.
Yeah.
It aggravates me.
Yeah.
So I want to start by the principle of self-reg, and that is understanding why we do what we do. So why would some people be triggered by somebody chewing loudly and somebody else is triggered by the counter not being cleaned off?
You know, I had to do another interview this morning, first thing. And the question they wanted to talk to me about was, this is a group in the US. Why are people protesting the way they are? And what was so interesting about the weekend footage that we had was that the protesters, you know, like it's all well and fine to say, well, you know, you get on your moral high horse. But in self-reg, we're always doing what you just said. We're always asking why. And so the couple of things I noticed in the footage that they sent me was that these people were really, really overwrought. The primary emotion that they had was anger. But, you know, there were some other things going on. I thought maybe some fear, anxiety. And so then you start to ask yourself, well, why? And I don't want to go into the political aspect of this, but the psychological is very interesting. So for some people, the stress is really, really high. And I may not be able to, you know, even get, I may not have the first clue how much stress they're under. Maybe it's stress about having food, or maybe it's stress about, you know, being enclosed in a small space with, you know, other family members that are losing it. Or maybe there's a lot of stress that's been going on in their lives way before this, way before the pandemic hit. And so they were already, you know, we use this tool, this kind of chart called a Thayer matrix to see how high or how low your stress is. Maybe they were already right through the roof and then just couldn't handle this. But it creates a really interesting question. Everything that we understand, at least at this moment, is that we have to really be scrupulous about social distancing, that we have to take all kinds of safety measures. No one really knows what's going on, so the best thing we can do is follow medical advice. But you cannot explain all this to somebody who's, in what we call in self-reg red brain, really, really acute red brain. And this is really, uh, you know, it's a position that I think a lot of the parents who are watching you find themselves in, where the kid is in really, really acute red brain. And the one thing we know from self-reg is this is not the time to explain to them why they need to do social distancing or why they need to, just suck it up. Because when somebody's in red brain, we now understand there's a real interesting shift that occurs in the brain. And the systems that they need to process what I'm saying, to really process it, to understand it, to absorb it, those systems are really, really, if not offline, pretty close to it. So this is not the time to explain.
I love this. And I think this is, again, like I can't stress enough, it's life-changing once you understand it. So red brain, this is what I always say, I think in terms of visuals, right? It's like you try to pour water on like a hard piece of—
That's great. That's real good.
And it's not going to get through. If you're trying to water something, if you're in red brain, it doesn't matter.
That's fabulous. I love it.
You might as well just pour the water out the window.
I love it.
You have to kind of stop and recognize red brain.
Yes.
I mean, you can tell us tons about this, but I always say if somebody's really angry,
yep,
they're not, forget it. Just walk away.
Yep. Except now we've got a problem, because let's say you are one of those families where you can't walk away.
Bingo.
So now what do we do? And you said it right at the very outset. You said, somehow what we've got to do now is we've got to lend them my calm. So there's various ways that we can do this, but one of the ones that really intrigues me is to stop talking. At this point, when somebody's in red brain, what they need is soothing. And maybe what they need is a caress, or maybe, like you said, maybe they just need some space, maybe some soft music. We have to figure out, and I think every parent has a sort of intuitive understanding of what will help calm their child down. So that's our first step. The first step we're going to do is by recognizing that my kid is in red brain, that these protesters are in red brain, that really helps me. It helps me calm down when I see that this isn't bad behavior. It's not misbehavior. It's stress behavior. And the calmer I am, the better I can lend my calm to somebody else. Okay, so that's step one. Let's just de-escalate. Let's get into that state where they can begin to process what we want to do at stage 2. Stage 2 is we do have to explain this stuff, right? Yeah, you want to say something, Michelle?
Well, I just think all I can hear you say, like, I get so passionate. Look, I get right in the camera. I'm like, because once you see it,
don't do that.
You've heard me say something. Once you see it, you can't it changes your whole lens of how you—
yes, it does.
And everything. And the biggest piece I see parents struggling with is their own expectations of what they should be doing. And if you can dissolve that, because that's the trigger in itself. That's what's putting you into red brain. Oh, my kid should be doing this, and I should be doing this, and I should be making salad.
I love what you're saying.
I should be, and it's like, no. Obviously, that's making you go into red brain, and you're turning. Stop it. And so, that's
awesome.
You've got to give yourself permission before you can even move on, because it's like you're going to keep going in this hamster. I know, because I did it. We're going to read for 10 minutes and you're going to love it. We're going to have fun. And nobody's doing anything. So I think that's the biggest piece, is the kindness, the soft eyes. You have this quote that you say so beautifully, and it's like you see others with soft eyes, but you have to start with yourself.
One of the things that happen. So what you just said is perfect. So what happens if you don't do what you just said? What I've noticed is that without realizing that I'm in red brain, as a parent or as a governor or whoever. What happens is you sort of, you start to up the ante. Okay, so when we think a kid is misbehaving and we're telling him, I'm going to take away your cell phone for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I've just sold your cell phone, no, and it just ramps up. Well, what I've noticed in this situation in the pandemic is that the more a parent is in red brain, the more they resort to fear to try to regulate their kid. So they so the escalation here is, I'm going to scare the bejesus out of this kid so that now, and I watched a wonderful interview with one of the psychologists from the CDC about how do you interact with your young children. And you can get this on, Jim Gaffigan has some sort of a YouTube site with this interview with this guy. It's really good. And what he does that I found fascinating from a self-reg point of view was, first, he got to calm himself. He was in that state where he understood they were scared. He understood that it's hard to be locked up. All these things, it's hard not to see your friends. But what he then did was, when they got into that space where the kids could start to ask questions, it turned out the kids are pretty scared. It's scary stuff. And rather than feeding into the scariness of it all, he diffused it. And what he did was he talked about the positives. Yeah, it's good. Now, for self-reg, one of the things that I was trying to get through in that blog you saw was, when I was talking with my own son, that kept on coming out of his mouth was, I can't. And what I wanted to do was shift it into, I can. What are the things you can do now? So that turned out to be a fairly successful interaction. And the reason is, what we're really trying to do is shift the needle from what I call a negative script, a negative cycle, to a positive one. What can you do for me? What can you do for mom and dad? What can you do for granny? What can you do for your siblings? What can you do? What can we learn from this about, well, I don't know how to put it. For me, the stuff I'm working on at the moment is, what can we do to become moral again? And we're going to have a self-reg reframing of that. This is an important moment in a family's experience. It's an important moment in our society. Look at how Canada is dealing with this. It's fascinating. I wrote another blog. My big sort of epiphany came about 2 weeks ago when the Premier of Ontario, with whom we have had some conflict when it came to education, he was invited to attack the Prime Minister and what the federal government is doing. And instead, what he did was he said how wonderful what the federal government was doing, and he called the Deputy Prime Minister one of our champions. So that's a little bit different from what we see if we watch CNN. And these are the kinds of things I want my children to understand. I want my kids to see. I'm not sure which step of self-reg that comes under. It's probably all 5. But if we can go through the 5 steps of self-reg with our kids during this moment, ourselves and with our kids, what's going to emerge from this, I think, is what I talk about in the new book. The new book is all about how do we become truly a just society. Mm-hmm. This has been a Canadian dream since Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And I'm thinking that what I see happening is us truly become, can I tell you one last story?
Yes, of course. Okay,
so I had another conversation this morning with a nurse who's a friend of mine who is an OR nurse. And so I was very sympathetic to her because I imagine this is really, really stressful for her. And her response was, no, the ones that are really, really having a hard time are the PSWs. Mm. And I thought, what a wonderful response, right? And that's what I want my kids to hear, and that's what I want all your listeners to hear, right? And this is step 5, I guess, of where do we go from here? Once we're all calmed down, once we understand, now where do we go from here?
I'm going to get to the 5 steps. There's so much here, and it's so hard whenever I talk to you, because I just want to talk for hours and hours and hours, because one thought takes me down a rabbit hole of another thought and another thought and another thought. You said something at the beginning, and what I love about when we talk about self-reg with children is, and I figured this out pretty quickly, children are just little smaller versions of humans. So their feelings are the exact same as ours. And so you said something and it jumped out at me, and you said, no one really knows what's going on. And you want to talk about the foundation of fear. Our logic.
Exactly.
Our logic brains we want answers. Okay. When is this?
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's really, really good.
And so you're in this, you're creating, it's creating this anxiety and this, all we want logic and we want answers, and nobody understands what's happening. And so you have extreme reactions happening as a result of that. And
that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
It just is putting so many people in red brain. I want to talk about what I said at the beginning. Your calm is not someone else's, and your stresses are not someone else's. And I recently had someone who's really close to me ask me this question. He said, how do you know you're in that flow state? And how do you know how you're in it? And I said, you have to stop and recognize it. And I said, what flow is, and this is what you talked about in your video that made me really kind of connect with it. So when I'm working out or I'm running, it's amazing because I realized, and then I realized my kids were the same, because once you have your own self-reg, you're like, oh, my kids are the same damn thing as me. I need to move to learn. So a lot of teachers, a lot of parents get frustrated because they're trying to teach these kids to sit still, right? And the kid actually needs to fidget, or the kid needs to move. By jumping on the trampoline, all of a sudden my kids start telling me, I feel afraid. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is the best therapy session I've ever had in my life. So I guess what I'm asking you is, how do you describe to people, because once you understand you're in a state of flow, and what state of flow is, you're not angry, you're not triggered, you're able to calm. Logic brain is trumping emotional brain. Pardon the use of word of Trump. But, so how do we teach people to do that? Because then once you know how to do it to yourself, you can ultimately recognize it in your children.
Well, you said a couple of things there that are huge. I mean, first of all, I'm like you, so I go into flow by running. But I can think of someone very close to both of us who goes into flow by doing yoga. And I can't do that. That makes me, I'm anything but in a flow state.
Tell me to breathe. It's stressing me out.
I was once asked to, I was once looking at a class. They were trying to force, it was a grade 3 class. They were trying to force them to do yoga. And what they found was about, 15 of the kids were really into it. All girls, by the way. 15 of the kids were sort of restless, but they do it because they want to get in trouble. 15 of the kids were going nuts. And the poor teacher, she was constant. These are all boys, of course. And she's yelling at them, get back on your mat. And so I'm kind of thinking, as a group experience, this didn't really go. And so let's take what you just said a step further. And it tells us that this is a sort of voyage of self-discovery. But the problem that you're describing is if it's a younger child, if it's a kid that, let's say an older kid, even a teen, they may need some help because they are in red brain, or they don't really know what calmness feels like. This is a common problem for our generation. So they'll need some parental help. And where we start is, I'm not sure we can teach someone this, but we can help them learn it. And the first step is to really help them get into that calm state, not a flow state. but a calm state. A flow state is, it's kind of unique. We talk about you lose all sense of time. You have very strong positive emotions. You become very creative, and you don't want to let it go. You don't want to leave the flow. So, I watch kids all the time, and I'm fascinated how for any 20 kids I watch, there's 20 different ways of going into flow.
So every parent right now is like, so is video games flow for my kid? Because that's when they lose sense of time. They forget to eat.
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So unfortunately, we have another phenomenon called dopamine hijacking. And what a video game does is it triggers a very ancient mechanism in the brain to keep us glued to the screen or keep us glued to any activity. And dopamine produces a kind of buzz. Um, and the problem with dopamine hijacking is the question that mom and dad got to ask themselves is, okay, so when it was finally time to wrench the video game out of your kids' hands, because they're not going to turn it off themselves, how were they? Were they nice and calm? That's a real interesting difference between flow and calm, because when you come out of a flow state, you are calm. You feel refreshed. In a weird way, when you come out of dopamine hijacking, you feel all jangly.
That is, I'm like, that was another one of those, bah, right? Because right now my youngest is really into reading, right?
Right.
But he much prefers me to read to him. He's 10 and he says, I just understand it, Mom, better when you read it. I'm like,
yeah.
Fine. So it's become our bonding thing as well.
That's awesome.
It is. It's great. And we're reading this big, Percy Jackson, and it's like he retains everything and it's great. Yeah. And when he comes out of it, exactly what you just said, he even in his physical stature and everything, he's calm. When he's playing this video game that knows what he's doing, right? I don't even get it. And you're like, get off that. So that was an aha moment for me to recognize that, because they can appear as the same state because they're like this. And so the stress of the parent is like, just let them have it, right? It's like the shoe. We talk about the shoe thing, right? It's like, just here, take it then. You are so stressed, but it's finding that other thing that works for them.
Okay, so can I give you another little bit of bio geek stuff?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so what you just said is really interesting. And I don't think you'll be aware of this, but you have a very soothing voice. And it's one of the reasons why, yes, you do.
I hate this.
Yeah, well, everybody hates their own voice when they hear it. But you do. You have a very soothing voice. And it's one of the reasons why you've been successful in things like what you're doing now. Because your voice is calming. And it has to do with tones and the speed at which you speak. Now, there's a scientist that we work with pretty closely called Steve Porges. And he's been looking at the mechanisms that we use to calm another person down. And the number one mechanism that nature selected for humans was the human voice. Wow. And the reason why your son, there's lots of reasons why he wants you to read to him. But I'm going to bet $10 right now that your voice itself is part of the regulating effect of the story.
That's fascinating to me because, so I love theater. I'm going off on a tangent here. And I love to do accents and voices. It's like
interesting.
And he hates it. Hates it when I do that. He won't let me. Mom, just read in your voice. Mom. And he gets right riled up. And I'm like, oh, let me read in accents. That's very funny. That's interesting.
That's interesting what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's so much. So then, what I want to talk about here is the 5 steps. So if we're going to give an example, we kind of are coming full circle here now when we talk about self-reg, but the biggest thing I say to people, my favorite step is reframe. It's the critical piece in all of this.
Yes.
Because when you can reframe your own behavior,
yes, then
you can reframe others, and also you can forgive yourself, because I have to tell people, even Dr. Stuart Shanker can be unself-regulated. And that in
all
itself
the time.
is, but people don't think that. They're like, oh, okay, so once I have this, I'm always going to be Buddha. It's like, no, no, no. I fly off the handle all the time, like a
Yeah.
lunatic. So I'm
Yeah, I agree. Reframing is for me also number one.
So I want to do a little like exercise. So let's say we have we're at the dinner table. Nobody's kind of helped us with the chores today. This is
Yeah.
I'll use a pretend example.
Yeah.
Nobody's done a thing all day. They've kind of sat around. Everybody's like, meh.
Yeah.
You're trying to be patient with them because you know it's hard for them. You're also maybe trying to do your own work, your own Zoom phone calls, your own emails. And, you know, now they want food and you've got to cook food and they're not even letting you set the table. They're not even helping set the table. And so you're like, I have to lose it for you guys to do anything.
Yeah.
Tell me how to implement self-reg in that very heated discussion.
So I'll give you a Shanker family example. So I had actually a fairly hard weekend this weekend. I just find what's, you know, I tell myself not to look at CNN, but I can't stop myself. So
that's like me with crunchy chocolate bars and butter tarts.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure which is worse. Anyways, so it got me all upset, and so we were cleaning up from dinner, and my wife had done everything, so I wanted her to have, you know, a break, and my daughter and I would do all the cleaning. But I was on edge. I was, you know, in the Thayer matrix that we use. I was in a high tension, low energy state. I used up all my juice on Trump, and so instead of asking her. I'll come back to how I should have done it in a second. But instead of being sort of self-reggy about it, I let all of my built-up tension out and tried to guilt her into cleaning up. And so my daughter responded that she was going to leave. She was not going to do anything. And it was enough to sort of trigger in me that I needed to reframe. And I did it very quickly. Now, let's tie this into what you and I were just talking about. So what I did was, without knowing it, my voice was conveying to her anger and everything I'd felt today.
That's fine. I'll just do it myself. So, just go sit down then.
Except I wasn't going to say that because I didn't want to do it myself. So what I said was, I just changed my pitch and I lowered my voice and I said, like you said, soft eyes. So I said in a soft voice, come on, let's do it together. Let's give mom a break. And of course, at this point, she jumped to it. And what we want parents to understand is they're trying to figure out, how do I lend my calm to my kids? Your voice is a magical tool. But it won't work it will not work. You can't control your voice if you're angry or anxious. So that's why what you said at the start is right. So you got to get yourself calmed down, and then your voice will communicate, I am calm.
And I find the easiest way is to actually tell your kids. Like, it's like the most freeing. I'm so direct and blunt. I need to go for a run. Leave me alone for 5 minutes. Yeah. And they actually start to do the same thing. Yeah. And they start to be able
That's good. I like that.
And it's because you're showing them.
I like that.
Apologizing. I mean, I'm really sorry. I was totally stressed out there. I shouldn't behave like that. I'm going to correct it now. And
okay. I love everything you just said.
And the other piece with a kid, like having a kid who's got a lot of anxiety, I learned this tip from a psychotherapist. Kids automatically assume everything is their fault. They're very selfish in nature. Yeah. And so if you're upset, they just automatically assume it's because of them. They don't understand that it could be a Zoom meeting that didn't work or an email or a bill. They don't get that. And so this one sentence is like, I'm actually really stressed right now, but it has nothing to do with you. You've done nothing wrong.
I love it.
And I was like, ooh, that's a game changer.
That is a game changer.
And it really frees that, especially those really anxious children.
So let's just tie that into something you said about a second ago about how important reframing is, because it's so easy to see the kid's behavior as selfish or or lazy or whatever. But in fact, if we can reframe, we see what's really going on beneath the surface is they're beating themselves up.
Yes, because
And
that's what we do.
okay,
Yeah, that's what
yeah,
we're doing too. Ultimately, I mean,
yeah,
and I think
yeah.
that's a
I agree.
generational curse passed down to
I agree. I
us.
agree.
Everything is our fault. Everything's my fault.
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
So we have reframe, and you did this in all of that dinner exercise, which I love. You recognized that you gave all your energy to Trump, and this is
Yep.
interesting. So people, it's abstract concepts, which is what the virus is in itself,
Yeah.
which is interesting, right? So it's
Yeah.
hard sometimes. Abstract it's not a tangible thing because you don't see energy going. You don't understand that this is like, I'm actually using energy by thinking and feeling
Great.
and getting worked up, right?
That's really good.
So you recognize that, then you responded, okay, oh crap, I mishandled that. And you remove the stress, right?
Yep.
So we've got three. So we've got reframe, recognize, respond. And then you've got reflect, right? I'm going to put a graphic up with this for you guys because
Okay.
I always need reminders of this as well. And then you do the reflection piece, right? And that I do that often with like what we just talked about with the kids, where we talk about like, I'm really sorry that actually had nothing to do with you. I'm just having a stressful day or whatever, right?
Okay. So how did I do step 5 yesterday? Well, I I went through step 4. I reflected how I watched CNN, I read the Washington Post, I read the New York Times, and I ended up really not in great shape. So as part of my step 5 this morning, I did this morning I um, resisted the impulse to just have a quick peek at CNN. And instead, I'm working on a really interesting book right now. So I went to work and I've had a good day today.
I'm telling you. So step 5 is restore, reduce. Whatever
Yeah,
that stressor was that you recognized in step 2, you need to pull it back. You need to
yeah,
you need to make it less than. And I'm telling you, I did the exact same thing, Stuart. I was sharing the daily address from the Prime Minister as a watch party every day on my Facebook. I was watching the news, and then about, I think it was maybe, day 7, I was like, and I'm done. Like it was
interesting, interesting.
making me crazy anxious. It was making me feel hopeless. And you've heard me say this so many times, hope is the glue
Yeah,
that keeps us together when we think we can't. And it was just like, and so I was like,
that's a great example.
and I'm done. And so I parked it, and it was like, okay, I got up, I started my fitness again. I still am liking my butter tarts here and there. Still have to have a sweet a day, but it's more in regulate, like it's more balanced. And so it's huge. Like you have to
So,
recognize those stressors.
okay, so let me do a little bit of bio here. So here we are, we're doing is this TV?
This Facebook,
Okay,
yeah.
so everybody's looking at you now, and your face, without you knowing it, is sending off some really interesting messages. Yep, yeah, that's the message, all right. And you can't fake it. And so people that are watching you are seeing that this is somebody who's got it together. This is somebody who,
Well,
well, but
I don't want to be too misleading.
yeah, but we can't. But if we are anxious, really anxious, or
I know where you're going with this.
okay, so it leaks out. And one of the reasons why I can't watch the President of the United States is because of the hooky stuff that's all leaking out. So,
Yes, that's huge. And so our kids are exactly the same.
uh-huh.
So if you are here,
Yeah.
like I say, we all have a threshold, right?
Yeah.
And some people, if you're already starting here,
Yeah.
it's even smaller.
That's right.
The leaking happens, and so
Yes.
that's why it's so critical to communicate with words. But it's not easy. Like I have people in my life, and they're like, Michelle, you take for granted how easily words come out of your mouth. And I said, I never thought about it like that. Like I can't get my thoughts into words.
That's an interesting point.
It is an interesting point. So for those people, and it seems to be more men, to be honest, because they seem to be more.
No, it's an interesting point.
And And so communicating with your kids that it's just, so even if you have these go-to catchphrases, it's not you. I'm just stressed right now, but you don't have, and also reminding them, because this was the game changer for me in self-reg, safety.
Yeah.
You are safe. It's mom and dad's responsibility, or whoever the caregiver
Exactly
is,
right. Exactly right.
to care for you right now. Unfortunately, there are a whole bunch of kids, and this is what breaks my heart, and it's another whole other blog, that don't have that at home right now. And the teachers or the other people in their life were those people for those kids, which is hard. But, you know, maybe you know somebody who does, but reassuring a child that it's going to be okay is, I mean, that's the foundation for a healthy adult that I just can't say enough
So
about.
that guy I saw on Gaffigan's YouTube channel, that CDC guy, what he did that I thought was so wonderful was he made the children feel safe.
People confuse that, because I say it all the time, and I'm like, they have to feel safe. And people were confusing that with like physical safety, like I wasn't going to hit them. And I said, no, that's not what safety means. You don't have to worry about, you know, bills being paid, or the health and welfare, or the house being taken. Like, that's what safety is. It's an emotional safety, not physical safety, obviously, yes, but safety. I feel like sometimes people get confused around that word because they associate it with a physicalness.
Yes.
Goes away.
Yes. Exactly right.
Okay, last thing before we wrap up: self-regulation
Okay.
versus self-control.
Yep.
In a nutshell.
Self-control is about using willpower to inhibit an impulse. Self-regulation is about managing your stress. Now, here's the key. We can manage our stress in ways that maybe serves for a moment, but is actually kind of maladaptive down the road. I'll give you an example. Maybe I'm really stressed, so I'm going to handle my stress by eating a bucket of ice cream.
Yeah.
Okay, so the ice cream, it's got some really wonderful properties. The sugar, the coldness, all of these actually have a biological effect that is very soothing for around 20 minutes.
Kind of like alcohol.
Yeah, a little bit. That's the right point though, right? Which is also sugar, as it happens. So what we want to do in self-reg is we really want to recognize when we're getting overstressed before I reach the point where I need a bucket of butter brickle.
Or a 2-liter bottle of wine.
Okay.
Just asking for a friend. Yeah.
And so then what you've done today is, by weaving it in with your own life, you've told everybody, these are the things I do. So I go for a run. I have my daily rituals, whatever they are. And I am not in that place where I'm driven for the 2-liter bottle of wine. Now, those are examples. What you do are examples of what we call growth promoting modes of self-regulation. And so what we need to learn is the way I'm handling stress maladaptive, meaning that kind of leads to more stress down the road, or is it growth promoting? And what's going to be growth promoting for every single person is different. Okay, so I got to share this with you. I was working with a class of really troubled 12-year-old boys in Yukon. And so we were strategizing, let's try lacrosse. I didn't want to do that. We're trying everything. And they finally came up with what they wanted to do to self-regulate. They knitted. They were into knitting. And then I found out, so I started to look into this, and it turns out that in the Second World War, when pilots were shot down, the Brits had them knit. So the point is, this was doubly adaptive or growth promoting self-regulation, because not only did they calm down, but they had really neat sweaters afterwards.
I love it. My youngest all of a sudden started knitting one day, and I was like, yeah. Okay, cool. Music, fitness, I mean, all of these things are those healthy, things. And so that's amazing. I've always used the stuffed drawer for self-control. That's always been visualization. Like, I'll shove it in the drawer.
That's great.
It's not folded. It's probably going to
You
jam.
really are a visual thinker.
I am. And it's probably going to break when I pull it open. But if I, Marie Kondo the drawer and I actually make sure everything's folded and put in, the drawer
Yeah.
will break and it will work long term. So that is the difference for me of self-control versus self-reg. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'll keep it down there. It's fine. But it eventually just explodes.
This is great today.
Yeah. It's life-changing stuff, you guys. This is, I think, is this your very first book?
No, it's the second one. It was a trilogy. The first book was for teachers called Calm, Alert, and Learning. That book is for parents. And then the one that's just come out, which is called Reframed, is for self-regulars.
Awesome. And where do people get them?
I don't know.
I'll put the link up. This Stuart's like, he's like, I don't know. I just write it.
That's about right.
And there's online courses. There's all kinds of stuff, you guys, going on. But also on all of your social media, you're putting out these amazing infographics on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That's another piece I would say to people. Follow people who actually give you hope, positive, helpful tools, as opposed to ranting and venting. And I mean, I do a funny group where I do rant and vent, but it's also like it's that balance of and humor and doing all of those things. Okay, so you're going to go run, and what else is your number one self-reg tool?
So for me, it's music, listening. And I have found what's really helped me through this so far is Mozart. So listen to something like the 41st Symphony, the Jupiter Symphony. And if you ever want a burst of hope, that symphony will do it.
My kids do the dishes so much better when I put classical music on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I blare it and they're like, Mom, and then they're like, and they can't help it because it just connects with their brain, whether you're conscious of it or not.
You made me laugh a lot today.
Well, I just adore everything you do. And again, I can't stress enough. Once you see this, it is life-changing for yourself and for others around you. You will have so much more compassion and empathy when you understand why people do what they do. And that is the undercurrent of us having a more just society. And I think, Premier Doug Ford figured that out somehow, that he needs to be collaborative, and that this wasn't about us. It's about never more have we been one than we are right now. Okay,
so you're gonna have to type out everything you just said, and we'll put that up on the website. That was word perfect.
I don't even know what I said. It just comes spewing out of my mouth.
Well, it's on tape, so we got it.
Thank you so much, Stuart.
Okay.
I have a couple of these books, actually, guys. I'm going to give them away over in the supporter group. And it's amazing, but a game changer right here. Self-regulation. Dr. Stuart Shanker, the man of the hour. Go get yourself self-regulated.
Will do. Bye, Michelle. This is great.
Bye.